So good afternoon and welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Effective Business Storytelling. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide, please. It's a pleasure to have you all here this afternoon. My name is Shanta Bulai, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs we offer, the college's contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. And I'm delighted to introduce the topic for today's webinar, Effective Business Storytelling. Stories are memorable, human beings are natural storytellers, and stories are powerful tools for increasing retention and engagement. Anyone can harness the power of storytelling to captivate others during times of change, renewal, and even crisis. Key takeaways in this webinar will include the components of a great story, how to find impactful stories to use, how to tie your story to your initiative or call to action, and lastly, how to keep your stories concise and compelling. It's a pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Jim Hoar. I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Shanta. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy that you have taken time out of your busy life to come join us for this webinar. I would like you to meet George Takei. He is a very famous actor. If you look at the photo of George on the left-hand side of your screen, that might be familiar to you. George played the role of, Lieutenant Sulu in the original Star Trek episode. And that was probably in the late 60s. But George is so much more than an actor. George is actually the grandson of immigrant parents from Japan. And George grew up in the 1930s and 40s in Los Angeles. George was just 4 years old when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And from that moment forward, Japanese Americans, American citizens of Japanese descent, were looked upon with suspicion and unfortunately fear. In February of 1942, President Roosevelt signed a declaration stating that all Japanese Americans located on the west coast of the United States would leave their homes and be put into 10 different prison camps scattered across the United States. George retells his story. When his family was relocated, armed guards came to their house in Los Angeles, and all they could carry was what they could carry in 2 hands with suitcases. He recalls his mother just sobbing when they had to leave their home. They were boarded on a train, and they were moved to a prison camp in the swamps of Arkansas. And so as a child, living behind barbed wire with armed guards became his reality. When the war was over, the government gave all of the families who had been displaced a one-way ticket anywhere in the United States. And George's family decided to move back to Los Angeles, but they had lost everything. They were penniless, and they lived in dire poverty for many years until George's parents could save up enough to finally get a decent home in a nice neighborhood in LA. Years later, when George was a teenager, he started to seek to understand why the country he loved betrayed him. And he looked in history books throughout his high school, and there were no mention of this relocation of Japanese Americans to 10 prison camps. And he started having conversations with his father. And he would say that he got a ton of wisdom from his father, and some of the conversations were quite heated. But he said, George, the United States democracy is a people's democracy. It can be as great as the people are, but it also can be as fallible as people can be. And from that moment forward, George's father started engaging him in the political process. And so while all of us probably know George as a very gifted actor, what George would also tell you is that he claims the role of an activist to be involved in the democratic process to make the country that he loves even better. Now, why did I start with that story? If you look at the photo on my slide on the right-hand side, that's George presenting this very story at a TEDx webinar or TEDx conference in Kyoto, Japan. It's probably about 15 years old, somewhere in the 10 to 15-year range. I don't know the exact date. But I can remember that story and the hardship he endured and the questions he had and the struggle he had personally to love a country that betrayed him. I remember that like it was yesterday. And I think it speaks to the power of storytelling. I want to introduce myself. Again, my name is Jim Hoar. I work as an instructor at the College of Continuing and Professional Studies. Prior to that, I spent 32 years at Target Corporation, first in the buying office and then in human resources. I worked in my final role in leadership development. And I want to welcome you to this webinar where we're going to explore the power of storytelling. Shanta relayed these outcomes. I just want to touch on them briefly. If we're going to be good storytellers, we need to know the ingredients of a great story. And often at work, we're going to use stories to influence people. And this is not about manipulation. This is just simply having a group of people do what you would like them to do to achieve some desired outcome for your organization. So you have to find the right story. And then when you're done with that, you need to practice the story to make it your own. First for content, so you remember the story well, but also for delivery, to make it compelling. And so we're going to explore this and maybe even do a little practice towards the end. But again, I want to say welcome, and we should be done probably about 10 minutes before the hour. At the very end, though, we will definitely entertain any and all questions you might have. So I want you all live very fascinating and crowded lives. And you may be thinking about all kinds of other things other than storytelling. So I want your brain to be on pause for just a moment. And I want you to recall the last great story that you heard. Okay. Think about a story like, and again, whatever came to mind, personal or professional, doesn't make any difference. What is that great story? And here are some things that I'd like to ask about that story. You don't need to tell us the entire story, but I'd love for you to use the chat feature in this webinar and say, whatever story came to your head, what made it memorable, and what effect did the story have on you? So I welcome for you to share. There's too many of you to do audio, so I would ask that you type responses whenever you are ready. But again, think about a story, a great story that you've heard. Can be recent, can be old. Feeling like I was part of the story. Thank you. Ooh, suspense. Funny. Twist. Pulled at your heart. Humor. Oh, this is great. Heartbreaking. Happy news. Relatable. Woo! Scary. Evoked feelings. Oh, yeah. Life affirming. Made you think. Wow, these are good. Thank you. And oh, this is great. I'm going to let it go. Keep adding them in. Oh, made me angry. All right. Wow. Inspired. Oh, these are good. All right. So thank you for sharing that. Here's the thing about storytelling. I just wanted you to recall a great story to get your mind into that mode, so we can explore it a little bit more. We are, in the human condition, hardwired for stories, okay? And we tell them as part of everyday conversation. And here's the thing, you've already described it in what made that story memorable. You could relate to it. You could place yourself in the story. And the mind has an amazing ability to visualize. It's one of the reasons why often it's recommended for preschool children to be read to because they can visualize and it taps into a vivid imagination that we all have. And the other thing I would remind you about is up until the printing press, this is the only way that history could be passed on from generation to generation. We often talk about oral history. Well, for hundreds of years, maybe even more, people told stories to relay what had happened before, so the generation that was upcoming would remember what had happened in the past. So we're hardwired for stories, and leaders use them all the time, regardless of where they lead. It can be political or religious or business. Here's the thing that I noticed, though. The good news is every single one of you is already a natural storyteller. We use them as part of everyday conversation. What I'm finding is that we often leave that skill at home when we go to work. And so what we're going to tap into today, and maybe kick around and practice a little bit, is what does great storytelling look like at work? Because I know you already know to do it at home. The question is, how might we do it at work, and specifically at work in the confines or the context of influence? Desired outcome number one is to know the ingredients of a great story. I'm a foodie, so I like using the word ingredients. You could say elements or parts. And if you have read articles or seen people talk about storytelling, they may use different labels, but I would say for the most part, these are the elements of most stories that are being told. And I just want to quickly walk through them. And then we're actually going to do a fun little exercise where you get to discern which are the elements or ingredients of a story. Ingredient number one is the background. We need to set context or setting. And again, what kind of background and how much detail you need to go into, that's a little bit of the art versus the science. But if, for instance, we're dealing with something in the past, remember in my story about George, our great actor and activist, I had to place it during World War II. That was important because something happened to him as a result of that. So we want to give background, if I can use an analogy, is like the frame around your picture, the picture being the story, but it sets context a little bit. So then when we go from background, we're now into characters. Who is involved in this story? And again, this is a little tricky. How much do we need to know about the characters in order for the story to be meaningful? Sometimes we need extensive character development, but it may not be like your favorite book, because good stories, particularly at work, need to be short. So we need to talk a little bit about the characters. In my example with George, I gave a little bit of context that, he was Sulu in Star Trek, but other than that, I didn't spend a lot of time on it. I then go into the plot. Now, the plot is the action. Something happens to the characters in the setting that a lot of times when I read articles about storytelling from people that do movies and commercials, they call it, quote unquote, a disruptive situation. Something happens that changes the characters' lives. Sometimes it can be something very radical, like George getting relocated, being ripped from his home and being put into a prison camp. That is a disruptive situation, changed his life forever. However, a plot can also be subtle. A plot can be a conversation that you had with somebody that changed your life forever, changed the way you thought, maybe changed the course of your life. So something needs to go on in the plot in terms of action. Sometimes there's conflict or friction. Sometimes it's dramatic and sometimes it's not. But we just simply say, what has happened to these characters and why does it matter? Okay, so we've done background, we've done characters, and we've done the plot. That plot will go along to reach what we call the climax. The climax is sometimes known as the moment of truth. It's when something significant happens where the characters learn something about themselves or the situation that's meaningful. In the story that I shared with you about George, George realized that even though he felt like his country betrayed him, it was still a great country, and the democracy he still believed in. But he had to go through a journey with his father and his own struggle to figure that out. So that's the climax. It's almost like the peak of the mountain. And you'll notice on my slide, I've got a staircase going up. The climax would be when we get to the top of the stairs and we can look around and see, oh, wow, this is what actually happened. What is the epilogue? Epilogue tends to be what lessons were learned, what wisdom was gleaned. Sometimes people say the moral of the story is, and it's what the characters have either learned about themselves or the situation that makes it a meaningful story. Now, if we were telling a story over the dinner table and you had invited me over for dinner, that's when we end casual storytelling. In the world of work, I'm going to add one more thing, and it's called the tie-in. The tie-in is, what does this story have to do with what you need or want people to do at work? So the tie-in is, the reason I told you this story is X, and I think it relates to the task at hand as Y. I shared with you why I shared this story about George because it's still emblazoned in my memory. It speaks to the power of storytelling that we want to unleash in front of you during this webinar. But that's where personal storytelling at home ends and work storytelling begins. The tie-in is critical. If we can't establish a good tie-in and people don't get it, it would almost be better as if we never told the story. So keep that in mind as we go through this journey. And it's one thing to talk about the ingredients of the story, but it's another thing to discern them on your own. So I'm going to share a commercial with you. It's a well-known commercial. It was shared during the Super Bowl. It has some of the highest audience recall of any commercial probably within the last 5 to 7 years. And when I play this, if you could either type on your screen, if you've got like a little notepad you're typing on, or on a scratch piece of paper, I would love for you to simply put down our ingredients as headers on your page: the background, the characters, the plot, the climax / epilogue. You don't need to worry about the tie-in, but I would love for you to just put those categories somewhere where you can look at them. Because what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to play the video back to you. It's only a minute. That's what I love about people who do commercials. They have to tell stories really fast. But in the course of 1 minute, can you discern the ingredients, the background, the characters, the plot? I know you can, but this is just going to be a practice thing so we can get really clear on being able to dissect a story. And if you're wondering why this is so important, to be a good storyteller, you need to know where to spend your time on each of those elements. And we'll talk about that a little later on, but right now I'm going to switch my screen so we can look at this video.
That you only need the light when it's burning low. Only miss the sun when it starts to snow. Only know you love her when you let her go. Only know you've been high when you're feeling low. Only hate the road when you're missing home. Only know you love her when you let her go. And you let her go. When you let her go.
All right. So I'm going to walk through this story right now, and I want you to tell me. Oh, wow, people are already putting in. That's great. Tell me a little bit about what the background is, and just tell me. Okay, barn stable. Yep. What else? What else about this background? What is the background of this story? Go ahead and type it in. Yep. Adoption center. Okay. Yep. Pet adoption center. Unlikely friendships, by the way, is part of the story, but it's not really the background. That's more of a theme, but I like it. Okay. So the background is, I believe at the very beginning, it's called the Warm Springs Puppy Adoption Center. Okay. And it's right next to a horse farm with Clydesdales. Okay. So if you're wondering what it has to do with Budweiser, it's simply because of the Budweiser Clydesdales, I believe was the connection. But thank you for asking that. Okay. So we've got a background. There's a puppy adoption center right next to a horse farm. Who are the characters in this? Tell me who the characters are. Okay, there's the puppy and the horse. Yep. There's the farmer. There's the lady that there's the lady that owns the adoption center or runs the adoption center. Yep. Yes, and then the adopter as well, the last guy, those are the characters. And if you think about it, within the course of 1 minute, we didn't get to learn a whole ton about them. They seem pretty nice, but there's basically puppy, horse, the man, the woman, and the adopter. So I think there are 5 total. Now, as short as you can in a Zoom chat, what do you think the plot is? Some of you have actually already shared what the plot is. If you were going to summarize the plot to somebody, what would you say? Unbreakable bond. Yep. Trying to get back your best friend. Yeah, it's interesting. One of you said it's almost like a forbidden friendship. It is because there are other characters pulling those two apart. Okay, that's good. So we have a budding relationship between a puppy and a horse, and they want to be together, but forces beyond their control are pulling them apart. That would be, that's the plot. Okay, now what's the climax? What's the moment of truth? Yep. Horse chasing after the car. The puppy's literally like, save me. Don't let me ever be separated from you forever. Yep. Adoption and the horses stop the car. Okay. So that's the climax, is when the adopter slams on the brakes because the Clydesdales are in front of his car and he can't move forward. All right. What's the epilogue? What happens after that? Reunited. Yep. Puppy returning to the farm. Yeah. Hugs a new home, like that. Adoption. Yeah. Friendship reunited. What else is going on at the very end of that story? Yeah. So we've got a reunited friendship. And then you also notice down at the bottom of the screen, the woman from the adoption center and the guy who runs the horse farm are leaning together at the fence watching this. And it leaves to wonder, the audience is left wondering, is that too a budding relationship as well? Okay. So very good. You disseminate, sense of belonging, family. Now we don't need to worry about the tie-in, okay? could we use this for work? We might be able to use this. But the reason I shared it with you is because you can see how complete a story can be in just 1 minute. Now, it's very visual because of film. I totally understand that you and I probably don't, unless we use our phone in the video feature, we may not be able to make a 1 minute commercial. That was a very well done commercial. But at least now you have a sense of being able to parse out anytime you hear a story. I want your brain to mentally sift through and pick out, all right, what's the background? What are the characters? Because if you use this story and make it your own, you have to decide what emphasis you want to place on each of the ingredients. Okay. So hopefully that was fun. I hope you enjoyed that. It's certainly a heartwarming commercial. I hope you found. I want to turn this now from just a general story to a story in business. Most of the time, at least in my observation, working at 32 years in corporate America, is that often stories are used by people to influence others, either an individual or a group. It tends to be a group, but it can be with the use of an individual. But if we're going to influence people and share a story that works, we then have to find a story that fits our influence challenge. And the very first thing we have to do is, if we're going to try to influence people using storytelling, we have to get really clear on what the call to action is. I've read lots of articles about storytelling from marketers, filmmakers, people that do documentaries, and they often talk about how they want people to feel. And that there's nothing wrong with that, but in the world of work, feeling needs to translate into actual action to get work done. Otherwise, it's not, we might be able to get something with just feelings alone, but really we need to know action. So before we can even look at a story to be appropriate, we have to think about, what is the actual call to action? What do I need people to do? Do I need them to, let's take for instance, most of us have been exposed to a software change at work. If we use computers, that's very disruptive. Often it changes how we do work. Maybe we just need people to embrace the new system, or embrace a new best method, or embrace a role change because there's been some structural changes in our organization. Most people I talk to nowadays in the world of work, whether it's profit or nonprofit, everyone's going through some kind of change. And so if you're a change agent or you need people to do something, just get very clear on what the call to action actually is. Once you know the call to action, we need to know what the theme behind that is. Let's take the software change as an example. If that's changing the way I do work, I may feel threatened by it because I'm an expert in the old way of doing something. So the theme might be letting go of something that I used to value in order for something new to happen, and something hopefully better. But we have to think about the theme. Good stories tie to influence by themes, okay? And some examples of themes that are often used in the world of work is, when we're going through a change, we often have to overcome obstacles. And there are a lot of good stories in the world about overcoming obstacles, displaying courage. As I said before, letting go of something so something else can take its place. So you have to do a little bit of homework and thinking about the tie, and then making sure that you can establish the tie-in. What does the story have to do with the task at hand? So what I would invite you to do, if you try this out in your real life, your job at work, is, if you try to tell a story, or you're planning on telling a story, in order for people to do something, try it with 1 or 2 people from that group and tell them, the reason I'm saying this story is X, and I think it relates to Y. And see if they get it. As a matter of fact, you could do this even with somebody at home. Sometimes people that know the least about what you do give you the best feedback. if your significant other or someone in your family, someone in your home or a roommate, if they don't get the connection, the likelihood that people at work aren't going to get it is also very high. It's not the end of the world. You just need to find another story. So again, we're thinking about storytelling in the world of work in the context of influence, because that's usually the most common way that people use it. Okay. And again, it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to actually try it. So here's one of the most important influence activities you will probably ever do in your career. And that is telling your career as a story with the intention of getting hired. So the call to action is that a hiring manager or HR person or a group of people would hire you. So here's what I'd like you to do. Either on screen or on a piece of scratch paper, I want you to consider the last job you had to apply for, or maybe you're thinking of a new job, like a dream job. Think about a job that either you've recently applied for or you have right now, or think about one you might be applying for, and use our 5-point story model to tell the story of your life or career so far. So think about this job that you want or that you just interviewed for or whatever. Just think of a job example that you would be in an interview situation for, and think of a story, a personal story from your life that might relate to why you'd be a great candidate for the job. And then think about that story, the background, the characters, the plot, the climax and the epilogue, and then the tie-in. How does this relate to the job? And here's the thing about picking the right story during a job interview. It's usually not when things go well. It's usually when you've had a growth moment. A growth moment meaning things didn't go so well. You might have received harsh feedback. You might have even gotten let go from a job. And what did you learn from it? How did you overcome that? Or did it change the trajectory of your career and now you're in a completely different line of work? Whatever story you want, I'm gonna be quiet now for about 3 to 4 minutes. And I want you to just simply jot down. You don't need to put paragraphs or anything, but just jot little bullet pointy notes about that story. Okay. So think about a story that would help you get either a job that you want or that you've recently applied for. And I'll give you 4 minutes. All right, friends, we are back. 4 minutes has elapsed, and you probably don't feel like you've had enough time to sketch out your story, but that's okay. Outline format is perfectly fine when you start. I actually recommend that you just do a very general outline of your story. So we have now talked about 2 of our desired outcomes in this webinar. We've talked about the ingredients of a great story and finding the right story to meet our influence challenge. In this case, it would be you getting hired for a job. Now, one of the things I will say about stories is good stories can go bad. And we've all listened to stories that were less than optimal. What causes stories to be not good? Well, if I asked you, you'd be able to do all this, but they're too long. And the problem is we need to know all the ingredients of a story. And again, I said this at the beginning, you want to know where to spend your time. If you are a person that highly values details, you will be tempted to give way too much background and way too much detail about the characters. Inversely, if you're not a detailed person, you might not give enough background or character development. But what I have found, most of the time people spend as much as 30 to 40% on the background and the characters, and nobody needs to know that much detail about your story. So that's the watch out. Where should you spend your time? Well, more than half of your time should be on the plot, the climax and slash epilogue, and your tie-in. So if I was going to do percentages, we probably only need the background and characters to be somewhere around 10 to 15%. The rest of it is where the action is. What happened in the story? What was the disruptive situation? When did it come to a point? When was the moment of truth? What was the lessons learned? And how does it tie into you getting a job? Okay. And then finally, if you're using humor, consider your audience. And now, for instance, a lot of times people are driven towards telling stories because they can be fun, but it has to be appropriate. In a job interview situation, it's very risky to use humor. You can, but I would say proceed with caution. So those are some of the things. In general, good storytelling is like good writing. It's the process of reduction, not expansion. Nobody likes to sit around the dinner table and hear really long stories. You've all been there, and so have I. We want the story to be short. How short? Well, right now, I'm going to mute myself again because I actually want you to try reading your outline and practice your story. Read the story out loud to yourself. Go ahead and just use the outline that you've just created. Tell it out loud to yourself. Don't worry about delivery. This is about content. Remember that when we practice our story, we do it twice. Once for content, the other for delivery, like how interesting is our delivery. And this practice will focus on story content. And I would say you might want to time yourself. It shouldn't really take more than, say, 3 to 4 minutes. When I timed my story about George to Kai, I believe it came in at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And the shorter, the better. I could have even probably shortened up my story. There are probably some details I shared I didn't need to do. So again, I'm going to mute myself, and however you have this written down, whether it's on screen or a piece of paper or whatever, try relaying back your story. Just say it out loud, because we write differently than we speak. And just give it a shot, and I'll give you about 3 minutes just to try it out. And I may not give you enough time to practice, but you can do so after the webinar. So again, try out your story, and I'll be back at you in 3. All right, 3 minutes has elapsed. I know that isn't enough time to practice. But again, I invite you, it's always good from a career management standpoint to have a story that you can share. Because here's the thing, even aside from an interview, you could be at a professional association or a meeting with colleagues, and you might run into somebody that maybe you might want to work for sometime. You can actually just share that story and just say, I'm sharing this with you because I think I might, my next career move is X. You still have to have the tie-in, but using your own personal career journey as story can be really, really powerful when it comes to career management, okay? And again, practice it aloud, because we write differently than we speak. A lot of people, I do speakers coaching sometimes, and people just want to share with me their PowerPoint or their speech, and I'm like, no, this is contact sport. You got to try it out, because we speak differently than we write. It usually takes 3 times to practice a story before it stops feeling clunky. So we're almost at the end. We talked about practicing for content and delivery. Once you get the content down and you know the story, you then need to make it interesting. Audience setting, knowing who is in the audience. So if you use examples, that the audience would actually get it. I had a colleague one time that used baseball examples in an overseas presentation where no one knew anything about American baseball. He said, you got to hit it out of the park. Don't do that. You got to check out a little bit. Sometimes I will preview a story that, especially if it's a large audience, I will preview a story with a couple of people from the audience and say, is this appropriate for the audience? We can use vocal variety. We can lower our voice. We can make it louder. We can make it softer. We can go faster. We can go slower. And then think about stance. Now, stance is your posture when you are standing up, but I also want you to think about your stance when you're online. I can lean forward to the camera when I want to place emphasis on something. And one of the things you're going to need to do if you're going to tell stories online via Zoom is you have to get used to looking at the camera instead of yourself or other squares on the screen. You have to start getting good at that. And that is a skill. That's a muscle you have to flex a little bit. You've seen me use gestures. You can emphasize content using gestures, and that's whether you were delivering live or online. Speed of delivery and pauses. If you're telling a story, sometimes it's hard to pause. But when you do, people then anticipate something really important is going to happen after in your story. So use them appropriately, but pauses can be very effective. And again, with your tie-in, what's the call to action? When we're at work, we need to be very clear. I need you to support X. I need you to embrace the software. I need you to be okay not being comfortable in your new job role. Whatever the coin of the realm may be, that's what the call to action is. Okay. So part of the reason we did this webinar is because we're going to be offering in the College of Continuing and Professional Studies a new class, and it's called Storytelling That Influences. So what are you going to get at that class that you didn't get during this hour? Well, we're going to talk, we're actually going to explore and use tools about those different, background, characters, plot. There are expanded tools to help you shape your story and make it your own. There are outlining tools as well as practice tools. There are multiple practice rounds to make the story your own. We will practice once for content. We will also practice for delivery. And it won't just be me. It will be a group of smart people there with you as a cohort, and we will give you feedback to make it better. And we're also going to talk a little bit about when should you have a story written versus delivering it orally. Many of you may be working where you have teams that are geographically dispersed. Sometimes we just can't get everybody together to tell the story live. And then the one thing that we won't have time today is very rarely do any of us, myself included, have an interesting enough life to where we can use personal stories all the time. You have to be a collector of great stories. And so we're going to talk about how do you do that? Where do you look? And we'll share the wealth on that because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of smart people that show up for this class. I believe our first iteration of Storytelling and Influences is going to be at the end of September. So I invite you to check that out online at the CCAP's website, the College of Continuing and Professional Studies. You can also message Shanta because she is one of the liaisons that help people enroll. So that's my shameless plug for a new class that I'm very excited to be teaching. I will be the instructor for this new class. So that's it. And I'm now going to turn it over to Shanta, and we can do a little Q&A here.
Yes, thank you so much, Jim, and thank you for your fabulous storytelling to give us examples of that. And so we're just going to change it up a little bit today. We are going to do a quick 2-question poll. This helps us with the content of our webinars. So before we move on to the Q&A, if you can just take part in this poll, and then we'll move right on to that. Also, Jim, can you go to the next slide, please? There is also going to be a QR code here if you would like to add different topics that you want to see in our webinars. So please use that QR code if you want to go ahead and do that. And we'll just do this for just 2 minutes, and then we'll move on here quickly to our Q&A portion. And I want to apologize in advance if I don't get your questions, but if you do have any that aren't answered here, feel free to email our CCAP's info@umn.edu, and we will pass those along to Jim as well.
And I will answer them, I promise.
Okay, thank you so much for your patience and for your questions as well. So now we will move on to a few questions here. Our first question is, what are your thoughts on, what thoughts do you have about storytelling in a written context?
So here's the thing about writing a story versus telling it. It's really powerful if you have a widely distributed audience. And I've also, some things that I'm thinking about in terms of considerations is English as second language, because I know from people that have learned another language, it tends to be easier to read something as opposed to hearing someone speak it. So there are a couple of different considerations. We're actually going to go through a whole host of considerations during the class. But one of the things is, do we have too much of a widespread of time zones to actually get everyone live or synchronous? Or could there be language or other cultural issues that would prevent me from doing it live? Live and in person would actually be the most fun, but there are some times when, especially if the story needs to live beyond you for a sustained period of time. Let's say that we're doing a change management initiative and the change is going to take 2 years. You might want that story to actually be posted up on somebody's website or in a SharePoint site, because that story needs to stick around for a while. It may be part of your training or change documentation. Those are some times where it might be appropriate to have written.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. And our next is there a diplomatic way to give feedback to people who take too long to tell a story?
So the answer is yes. And what I recommend is a phrase that we use a lot, or I use a lot when giving people feedback, and it's called even better if. So here's how that would play out. Jim, I really enjoyed your story. It really moved me, but it would be even better if you took a little less time on character and background and a little bit more time on the action of the actual part of the story. Because I was afraid at the end you might have been losing people. So use the phrase, it would be even better if, and that's kind of a softening way to say, your story wasn't awful, but it could be even better. I use that often when we give each other feedback during a class at CCAPs. So even better if is my money phrase to do that in a nice way.
Even better if. I'll have to remember that one. I feel like that happens. Um, and this might be a little bit covered what you just mentioned here, but what are the most common storytelling mistakes you have seen in the corporate setting?
That's a great question. Storytelling is just like going through an interview. A lot of times people interview and you'll be asked a question, tell me about a time when, and that launches into a story. Far and away, like 90% of all the people spend way too much time on the background and the characters. What people want to know is what happened in the plot. What is the disruptive situation? That grabs people's attention. And this disruptive situation, if people can put themselves and relate and say, oh my word, if that happened to me, that would be awful. That's when you get people to put down their phones and look up at you. So don't spend too much time on background or characters. Again, we talked about it a little bit, but only like 5 to 10, maybe 15%. The rest should be plot, climax, epilogue, tie-in. And I can tell you, people want to share a ton about the background. And I can tell you in a nice way, people just don't care about the background. They want to know where the action is.
Wonderful. And I think we'll just do one more question and then I'll go quickly through the next slides here. I wonder if you have comments on storytelling as relating to nonprofits sharing client member successes with the goal of attracting donations and funding.
Actually, I do, because where I worked at Target, every year there would be a United Way rally. And it's interesting because when we talk about influence, we can think about logical persuasion, which is using facts and figures. And then we can also use value-based appeals. There's another class I teach called that's only on influence, no storytelling. And those are kind of the two ways to do it. So like in a nonprofit, I remember very distinctly, most United Way rallies at Target would say, they'd have a pie diagram and say 96 cents of every dollar that you donate goes to the United Way agencies that that we serve. But that's not where they spent the majority of their time. They then brought in someone who actually worked at Target, who shared a story about a United Way agency helping their family through a really tough time in their lives. And that's what got people to open up their wallets or to sign for a weekly payroll deduction. So there's a mixture of logical, like sharing some compelling statistics, but the storytelling, and if it's storytelling within that donor population, it can be really, really powerful. And I can remember all kinds of stories that people shared, people that literally were down the hallway from me, where a United Way agency had helped their families so much in a crisis. So that would be my best advice.
Great, thank you. So again, thank you everyone. If I didn't get to your question, please submit those to ccapsinfo@umn.edu and we'll pass those along to Jim. And Jim, if you could please go to the next slide, please. So CCAPS now offers flexible workforce development solutions designed to equip employees with the targeted knowledge and skills your organization needs. Our programs include industry-driven bachelor's and master's program, along with 12 non-credit certificates and over 80 individual courses. If you or someone in your organization would like to learn more, please schedule a consultation with our business development representative, Beth Laurie. There's also a QR code there if you'd like to check that out. And if you could go into the next slide, wonderful. As I mentioned earlier, we will send a link to the webinar recording within a week of today's webinar. The recording will also be posted to our CCAPS webinar archive as well as our CCAPS YouTube page. And the University of Minnesota employees are eligible to receive the well-being points for these webinars. So please use those links if you'd like to submit those questions. And that is going to wrap up today's webinar. Thank you all for who joined us today. And thank you, Jim, again for sharing your wisdom on storytelling.
Absolutely. I hope to see some of you in our debut of this new class. And otherwise, I hope you guys all have a great day. But thank you for coming in and checking out what we had to do. Really appreciate your participation. And Shanta, as always, thank you for being my partner in crime.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right. We'll see you guys later. Have a great day.